Judge Ellen Morris walked into courtroom number 4 at exactly 9 in the morning. She wore her black robe, freshly pressed, and carried a stack of folders under her arm. Her gray hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and her reading glasses hung from a chain around her neck. At 57, she had been a judge for nearly 20 years in the small city of Riverside, California. The courtroom was already busy. People sat in the wooden benches, some nervous, some bored. Lawyers in suits moved around with purpose. The court clerk, Mary, nodded at Ellen as she took her seat behind the large wooden bench. "Good morning, everyone," Ellen said, her voice clear and firm. The room quieted down. "Court is now in session." Mary handed Ellen the first folder. "Case number 2478B, Your Honor. Frank Garland charged with trespassing on public property after hours." Ellen opened the folder and read the details. Frank Garland, age 68, had been found sleeping on a bench in Memorial Park at 2:30 in the morning 3 days ago. The park closed at 10 p.m., a simple case, one she would normally handle in less than 5 minutes. "Is Mr. Garland present?" Ellen asked, looking up. A man stood slowly from the back row. He wore clean but very worn clothes, faded jeans, an old flannel shirt, and boots that had seen better days. His face was weathered, with deep lines around his eyes and mouth. His hair was white and cut very short, almost like a military cut. He stood straight, with his shoulders back. "Yes, Your Honor," he said in a quiet voice. "And counsel?" Ellen asked. A young man in a slightly too large suit stood up. "Richard Collins, public defender representing Mr. Garland, Your Honor." Ellen nodded. "Please approach." As Frank walked to the front of the courtroom, Ellen noticed he had a slight limp. He moved carefully, like a man who was used to being in pain but didn't want to show it. He kept his eyes down, but there was something about the way he carried himself that caught Ellen's attention. There was dignity there, despite his obvious poverty. "Mr. Garland, you are charged with trespassing in Memorial Park after closing hours. How do you plead?" Frank looked up briefly, then back down. "Guilty, Your Honor. I was there. I'm sorry for the trouble." Ellen studied him for a moment. Something didn't feel right. In her years on the bench, she had developed a sense for when there was more to a story. "Mr. Collins, have you had adequate time to consult with your client?" The young lawyer shifted uncomfortably. "We spoke briefly before court, Your Honor." "How briefly?" "About 15 minutes, Your Honor." Ellen frowned slightly. She knew the public. Defenders were overworked, but 15 minutes wasn't enough. "Mr. Garland, may I ask why you were in the park after hours?" Frank looked up, meeting her eyes for the first time. His eyes were a clear blue, but they seemed distant, as if part of him was somewhere else. "I needed a place to sleep, Your Honor." It was quiet there. "Do you have a home, Mr. Garland?" He hesitated. "Not at the moment, Your Honor." Ellen nodded. It was as she suspected. "The officer's report indicates you had some personal items with you. A military medal was mentioned." Frank's posture straightened even more. "Yes, Your Honor, Purple Heart and Bronze Star, Vietnam." The courtroom was very quiet now. Ellen noticed several people sitting up straighter, paying more attention. "You served in Vietnam, Mr. Garland?" "Yes, Your Honor, Marine Corps, 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines, 2 tours." Ellen felt something tighten in her chest. Her father had been a Korean War veteran. She remembered his nightmares, his struggle to fit back into civilian life. She had been just a child, but some memories stayed with you. "And how long have you been without a home, Mr. Garland?" Frank looked down again. "About 3 years now, since Susan passed, my wife," he added. Ellen made a decision. It wasn't strictly by the book, but her courtroom, her rules. "Mr. Collins, Mr. Garland, I'd like to take a short recess. We'll return to this case in 30 minutes. Court will take a 15-minute break, and then we'll proceed with the next case on the docket." Ellen stood, and everyone in the courtroom rose as she left through the door behind her bench. In her chambers, she picked up the phone and made a call to an old friend who worked at the VA. "Sam, it's Ellen. I need some information on a veteran. Urgent." She gave Frank's details. "Call me back in 10 minutes. While waiting, she looked up Frank Garland's name in the court database. No prior arrests. Not even a traffic ticket in the last decade. She then did a broader search and found his work history. He had been a mechanic at Riverside Auto for 30 years, retiring when the shop closed down 5 years ago. The phone rang. "Ellen, it's Sam. I found your guy, Frank Garland, Marine Corps, honorable discharge in 1971, and yes, Purple Heart and Bronze Star with Valor, both from his second tour. He's eligible for full VA benefits, housing assistance, medical care, the works." "But?" Ellen asked, hearing something in Sam's voice. "But he hasn't claimed most of them. Looks like he was getting treatment for PTSD years ago, but stopped coming after his wife died. Cancer, according to the notes. There's a flag in his file from a social worker who tried to follow up 2 years ago. Couldn't locate him. He's homeless, Sam. Sleeping in Memorial Park." There was silence on the line. Then Sam said, "That's not right, Ellen. Not for a guy who served like he did." "No, it's not," Ellen agreed. "Can you come to the courthouse? Now?" "On my way." Ellen made 2 more calls before returning to the courtroom. As she entered, everyone stood again. She sat down and adjusted her glasses. "Case number 2478B, Frank Garland. Mr. Garland, please approach the bench again." Frank came forward standing, tall despite his obvious discomfort. "Mr. Garland, I've learned a few things during our recess. You were a mechanic for 30 years. You have no criminal record. You served our country with distinction. And you're eligible for benefits you're not receiving." Frank looked surprised. "I didn't want to be a bother, Your Honor. There are others who need help more." Ellen felt a surge of both sadness and respect. How many veterans like Frank were out there, too proud or too broken to ask for the help they deserved? "Mr. Garland, I'm going to do something unusual. The charge against you is minor, and given the circumstances, I'm inclined to dismiss it. But I'm more concerned about what happens when you leave this courtroom." The courtroom door opened, and Sam Williams walked in, still wearing his VA office badge. Ellen nodded to him. "That gentleman is Sam Williams from the Veterans Affairs Office. After we finish here, he's going to help you sort out your benefits. But there's another issue. You need a place to stay while that happens." Frank looked embarrassed. "I'll be all right, Your Honor. I don't want special treatment." Ellen leaned forward slightly. "It's not special treatment, Mr. Garland. It's what you earned. What you deserve." She looked out at the courtroom. It was fuller than usual today. Something made her take a chance. "I'm going to make a simple appeal to everyone in this courtroom. Mr. Garland needs temporary housing while Mr. Williams helps him navigate the VA system. Is there anyone here who might be able to help?" The courtroom was silent. People looked at each other, some uncomfortable, some curious. Frank looked down at his worn boots, his face flushed with embarrassment. Ellen was about to speak again when a movement in the back of the courtroom caught her eye. A man was standing up. He was older, perhaps in his early 70s, with thick white hair and the solid build of someone who had stayed active despite his age. He wore a denim jacket with a small pin on the collar. Ellen recognized it as a Vietnam service pin. The man in the back of the courtroom stood tall and straight. Everyone turned to look at him. He was not young, but he moved with confidence as he walked down the center aisle toward the front. His steps were firm and even. The small pin on his denim jacket caught the light as he moved. "Your Honor," he said in a clear, deep voice. "My name is Joe Simmons." Judge Ellen Morris nodded at him. "Mr. Simmons, you have something to say?" Joe looked at Frank. His eyes were kind, but serious. "I was in Vietnam too. Army, 25th Infantry Division, 1968 to 1970. Frank's eyes, which had been looking down, now lifted to meet Joe's. Something passed between the two men, something only they could understand. "Marines, right?" Joe asked Frank directly. "Yes, sir. 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines," Frank replied. His voice was stronger now with a touch of pride. Joe smiled slightly. "Different branches, same mud." He turned back to the judge. "Your Honor, I have a spare room. It's not fancy, but it's clean. I live about 10 minutes from here." Ellen studied Joe carefully. "Mr. Simmons, that's a generous offer. May I ask why you're in court today?" Dispute with a contractor about some work on my house. Case number 2481B. I was waiting my turn when I heard you talking about Mr. Garland. Ellen checked her docket. Joe Simmons was indeed scheduled to appear later that morning. It wasn't a criminal case, just a small claims matter. Do you know Mr. Garland? She asked. No, ma'am, never met him before. But I know what it's like to come home and feel like you don't fit anywhere. Some of us were lucky enough to find our way back. Some weren't. Frank was watching Joe now, his eyes clear and focused for the first time since he had entered the courtroom. Ellen turned to Sam Williams, the VA representative. Mr. Williams, what's your take on this? Sam stepped forward. Your Honor, our priority is getting Mr. Garland stable housing and reconnected with his benefits. If Mr. Simmons is offering temporary housing, that could give us time to process the paperwork. It usually takes a few weeks to get everything in order. Ellen thought for a moment. This was unusual, but it felt right. She looked at Frank. Mr. Garland, how do you feel about this arrangement? Frank hesitated. His hands, rough from years of mechanical work, twisted together. I don't want to be a burden to anyone. Joe laughed, a warm sound that filled the quiet courtroom. A Marine, a burden? Never thought I'd hear those words together. His face grew more serious. Look, Frank, may I call you Frank? I've got a fishing boat that needs a mechanic's touch. Word is you're good with engines. I'm thinking we could help each other out. For the first time, a small smile appeared on Frank's weathered face. I do know engines. Been fixing them since I was 14. Ellen watched the two men. There was something powerful happening here, something beyond the usual business of her courtroom. She thought of her father again, how he had struggled alone until he found a group of fellow Korean War veterans who understood him in ways no one else could. Mr. Collins, Ellen said to the public defender, do you have any concerns about this arrangement? The young lawyer looked surprised to be asked. No, Your Honor, it seems to address my client's immediate needs. Ellen nodded. Very well. Mr. Garland, I'm dismissing the trespassing charge. Mr. Williams will help you with your VA benefits. And if you're agreeable, Mr. Simmons is offering temporary housing. She looked at Joe. Mr. Simmons, I appreciate your stepping forward. Joe gave a small nod. Just doing what should be done, Your Honor. Ellen turned to her clerk. Mary, please reschedule Mr. Simmons's case for next week. I think today he has more important business to attend to. Mary nodded and made a note in her computer. Ellen looked back at Frank and Joe. Gentlemen, you're free to go. Mr. Williams, would you go with them to start the benefits process? Of course, Your Honor, Sam replied. As the three men turned to leave, Ellen called out, And Mr. Garland? Frank turned back. Yes, Your Honor. Thank you for your service to our country. Frank stood a little straighter. He gave a small nod and followed Joe and Sam out of the courtroom. Ellen took a deep breath and picked up the next file. Next case, please. The rest of the morning passed in the usual way. Small crimes, disputes, bail hearings. Ellen handled each one with her usual care and attention, but her mind kept going back to Frank and Joe. When the lunch break came, Ellen went to her chambers and closed the door. She sat at her desk and opened a drawer. From it, she took an old photograph in a simple frame. It showed a young man in a military uniform smiling at the camera, her father, before Korea, before the nightmares. Ellen touched the photo gently. I hope you had someone like Joe, Dad, she whispered. There was a knock at her door. Come in, she called, putting the photo back in the drawer. Mary, her clerk, entered with a sandwich and a cup of coffee. Thought you might want lunch at your desk today. You've got a full afternoon. Thank you, Mary, Ellen said, grateful for the thoughtfulness. Mary hesitated at the door. That was a good thing you did this morning, Judge, with the veteran. Ellen shook her head slightly. I didn't do much, just asked a question. Mr. Simmons is the one who stepped up. But you made space for it to happen, Mary said. Most judges would have just processed the case and moved on. Ellen hadn't thought of it that way. Sometimes the system needs a little humanity, she said simply. After Mary left, Ellen ate her sandwich and reviewed her afternoon cases. But her mind kept drifting to Joe and Frank. She wondered how they were doing, what they were talking about. Were they at Joe's house now? Was Frank getting the help he needed? At 3 o'clock, as Ellen was handling a routine drug possession case, the courtroom door opened quietly. Joe Simmons slipped in and took a seat in the back row. He caught Ellen's eye and gave her a small thumbs up. Ellen nodded slightly and returned to the case before her, but she felt a weight lift from her shoulders. When the court day ended at 5, Ellen gathered her files and left the bench. As she was about to enter her chambers, she saw Joe waiting in the hallway. "Mr. Simmons," she said, approaching him. "How is everything going?" Joe smiled. "Good, Your Honor." Frank settled in. Sam got the paperwork started for his benefits. He should have his first check in 2 weeks and be eligible for VA housing within a month. "That's excellent news," Ellen said. "And how is Mr. Garland doing?" "He's quiet, but he already fixed my lawnmower." Joe chuckled. "Said he couldn't stay without earning his keep. I told him the boat engine was next." Ellen smiled. "That's good to hear." Joe's face grew more serious. "I wanted to thank you, Judge Morris, for what you did in there. Most people just look right through guys like Frank." Ellen shook her head. "I just asked a question. You're the one who answered." "Sometimes asking the right question is everything," Joe said simply. "Anyway, I won't keep you. I just wanted you to know that Frank's okay, and I think he's going to stay that way." "Please keep me updated," Ellen said. "And good luck with your contractor dispute next week." Joe grinned. "After today, that seems like a very small problem." As Joe walked away, Ellen stood in the hallway for a moment. In 20 years on the bench, she had handled thousands of cases. Most were forgotten as soon as they were closed, but she knew she would remember Frank Garland and Joe Simmons for a long time to come. Sometimes, Ellen thought as she walked to her car, justice wore unexpected faces. Today it had looked like an old soldier, standing up for another old soldier. Simple, direct, and more powerful than any law on the books. She wondered how many other Franks were out there, and how many Joes it would take to find them all. 1 month passed. The days grew warmer as spring moved toward summer in Riverside. Judge Ellen Morris continued her work in courtroom number 4, handling the steady flow of cases that came before her. But she often thought about Frank Garland and Joe Simmons, wondering how they were doing. On a sunny Tuesday morning, Ellen was in her chambers reviewing files when Mary knocked on her door. "Judge Morris, there's someone here to see you. A Mr. Simmons and Mr. Garland." Ellen looked up, surprised and pleased. "Send them in, please." Joe entered first, wearing a clean plaid shirt and jeans. Behind him came Frank, and Ellen was struck by the change in him. He still stood straight, still had that military bearing, but his face had more color. His clothes were neat and clean, and his eyes were clear and focused. Most noticeable was the small smile on his face. He looked like a man who had found his footing again. "Judge Morris," Joe said with a nod. "Hope we're not interrupting." "Not at all," Ellen said, standing to greet them. "Please sit down. It's good to see you both." The men sat in the chairs across from her desk. Frank held his cap in his hands, turning it slowly. "We wanted to update you," Joe said. "Frank's got his benefits sorted out. His first check came last week." "That's wonderful news," Ellen said. She looked at Frank. "How are you doing, Mr. Garland?" Frank nodded. "Better, Your Honor. Much better. I've been seeing a doctor at the VA, talking about things I haven't talked about in a long time." Ellen understood what he wasn't saying. The memories of war, the nightmares, the struggles that had followed him home decades ago. "And Mr. Simmons? How's that boat engine coming along?" Frank smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes. "Purrs, like a kitten now. We took it out fishing last weekend. Caught 3 bass," Joe added with pride. Frank's got a knack for finding the good spots. Ellen noticed how they spoke, finishing each other's thoughts, easy in each other's company. In just a month, they had formed a bond that some people never found in a lifetime. "I'm heading to my own place next week," Frank said. "VA housing. It's a small apartment, but it's mine. That's excellent, Ellen said. You've made remarkable progress. Joe cleared his throat. That's part of why we're here. We wanted to thank you. What you did that day in court, it changed things for both of us. Ellen shook her head. I just asked a question. You're the one who answered, Mr. Simmons. Maybe, Joe said. But you saw Frank as a person, not just another case. Not everyone does that. Frank leaned forward slightly. I was lost, Your Honor. Had been for a long time. After Susan died, I just drifted. Didn't seem to matter where I ended up. And now? Ellen asked gently. Now I've got a place to be, things to do. He glanced at Joe. People who understand. Joe nodded. That's the other reason we're here. We've been talking to some folks at the VFW. There are a lot more veterans out. They're like Frank was, struggling, falling through the cracks. We want to do something about it, Frank added. His voice was stronger now, with purpose. Start a program, help them find their benefits, their way back. Ellen was touched by their mission. That sounds like a wonderful idea. We're calling it Brothers Found, Joe said. Open to all veterans, any branch, any war. We've already got 5 volunteers from the VFW. The thing is, Frank said, we were wondering if you might help us. Not with money, he added quickly. But maybe you could come speak at our first meeting? Tell people what you saw, why you spoke up that day in court. Ellen was surprised by the request. Judges didn't usually get involved in community programs. There were rules about keeping a proper distance. But as she looked at these 2 men, she knew this was different. I'd be honored, she said simply. Relief and happiness showed on both men's faces. It's this Saturday at the VFW Hall on Maple Street, Joe said. 2 o'clock, nothing fancy, just some coffee and conversation. But it could mean a lot having you there. I'll be there, Ellen promised. After they left, Ellen sat thinking about the change in Frank. From a lost, homeless veteran to a man with purpose and hope. All because of one moment of connection, one person reaching out. She thought about her father again, how he had struggled alone until finding others who understood. Saturday came, and Ellen drove to the VFW Hall. It was a simple building with an American flag flying out front. As she parked, she felt slightly nervous. This wasn't a courtroom. Here she wasn't Judge Morris with all the authority of the bench. She was just Ellen, a daughter of a veteran trying to help. Inside, the hall was set up with chairs in a circle. A table along the wall held coffee, water, and some cookies. Joe spotted her and came over immediately. Judge Morris, you came, he said, as if he hadn't quite believed she would. I said I would, Ellen replied with a smile. Joe led her to where Frank was talking with a group of men and women of various ages. All veterans, Ellen guessed, from their bearing and the way they spoke to each other, a shorthand of shared experience. Everyone, Joe called out. This is Judge Ellen Morris. She's the one I told you about. Faces turned toward her, curious and respectful. Frank stepped forward. Thanks for coming, Judge. It means a lot. More people arrived. Soon there were about 20 veterans in the room. They took seats in the circle. Joe stood up to speak. Thanks for coming, everyone. As you know, we're starting this group to help veterans who've lost their way. Like I was once, like Frank was until recently. He glanced at Frank, who nodded. Sometimes all it takes is one person reaching out, one moment of connection. That's what happened in Judge Morris's courtroom last month. He turned to Ellen. Judge, would you mind telling them what you saw that day? Ellen stood up. She wasn't used to feeling nervous when speaking in public, but this was different from court, more personal. She took a deep breath. I'm not a veteran, she began. My father served in Korea, but that's the closest connection I have. In my courtroom, I see all kinds of people. Some are there because they made bad choices, others because they had bad luck, and some, like Frank, are there because we, as a society, failed them. She told the story of that morning in court, how she had noticed something in Frank that went beyond the simple trespassing charge, how she had taken a chance and made an appeal, how Joe had stood up. What I saw that day was simple human connection, she said. One person recognizing another's pain and reaching out, not with pity, but with understanding, with brotherhood. She looked around the circle. What you're doing here is powerful. You understand each other in ways the rest of us never can, and that understanding can save lives. The room was quiet when she finished. Then an older man in the corner spoke up. My grandson came back from Afghanistan 3 years ago. He's not the same boy who left. Doesn't talk to anyone, doesn't seem to care about anything. I don't know how to reach him. Frank leaned forward. Bring him next time. Don't push him to talk. Just bring him. Let him sit and listen. A woman with graying hair nodded. My sister served in Iraq. She's struggling with her benefits, getting the runaround from the VA. I can help with that, Joe said. I've gotten pretty good at navigating the paperwork. One by one, people shared stories of themselves, of family members, of friends who were struggling. And one by one, others in the circle offered help, suggestions, or simply understanding. Ellen watched, deeply moved. This was a different kind of justice than what happened in her courtroom. No laws, no rulings, no sentences. Just people connecting, helping, healing. As the meeting wrapped up, several veterans came to thank her. The older man with the grandson, in particular, seemed hopeful for the first time in years. Frank approached her last. Thank you, Judge Morris, for everything. Please call me Ellen, she said, and thank you for letting me be part of this. Frank smiled. We're just getting started. There's a lot more brothers to find. As Ellen drove home, she thought about the power of simple human connection. In her courtroom, she dealt with laws and procedures, evidence and precedents. But today, she had witnessed something just as powerful. The healing force of being seen, being understood, being welcomed home. 3 months passed. Summer heat settled over Riverside, bringing long, warm evenings and bright, busy days. The Brothers Found program grew steadily. What started with 20 veterans in a circle now regularly drew 50 or more. They met twice a week at the VFW hall, which had become too small for their growing numbers. Frank now lived in his own small apartment provided by VA housing. He had made it homey with a few plants and photos. His favorite was a new picture of him and Joe on the fishing boat, holding up a large bass they had caught together. It sat on his bedside table, a daily reminder of how far he had come. On a Tuesday in July, Frank sat in the waiting area outside courtroom number 4. He wore a clean button-up shirt and his best jeans. His white hair was neatly combed, and he held a folder in his weathered hands. He felt nervous but determined. The door opened, and Mary, Judge Morris's clerk, stepped out. Mr. Garland? Judge Morris can see you now. Frank stood up and followed Mary into the judge's chambers. Ellen looked up from her desk with a smile. Frank, what a nice surprise. Please sit down. Frank sat, placing the folder carefully on his lap. Thank you for seeing me, Judge. I know you're busy. It's Ellen, remember? And I'm never too busy for a friend. How are you doing? How's the program coming along? Frank smiled. It's going. Well, better than we expected, actually. That's partly why I'm here. He opened the folder and took out some papers. We've been keeping track of our progress. Thought you might like to see the numbers. Ellen took the papers. They showed a simple but clear record. Veterans helped, benefits secured, housing found, medical appointments made. The numbers were impressive. In just 3 months, you've helped 42 veterans get their benefits sorted out? Ellen asked, looking up at Frank with admiration. Frank nodded. Joe's good with the paperwork, and we've got 3 volunteers, now who know the VA system inside and out. And 17 veterans placed in housing? That's remarkable, Frank. It's a start, Frank said modestly. There's still many more out there who need help. Ellen noticed something else in the report. You've been working with the county jail. Yes, Frank nodded. We learned that about 12% of the inmates are veterans. Many don't even know they're eligible for benefits or treatment. We go in twice a week now, talk to them, start the paperwork before they're released. He paused. It's hard, seeing them there, but it helps knowing we can make a difference. Ellen was deeply impressed. What had started as a simple moment in her courtroom had grown into something substantial, something that was changing lives. "There's something else," Frank said, taking another paper from his folder. "We've been invited to speak at the National Veteran Service Conference in Washington next month, to share what we're doing, help other communities start similar programs." "Frank, that's wonderful. Congratulations." Frank looked down at his hands. "The thing is, we'd like you to come with us, to speak about how it all started. Your perspective, as a judge seeing veterans in your courtroom. It could help other judges understand." Ellen hadn't expected this. "I'm honored, Frank, but I'm not sure if I should. Judges have to be careful about advocacy work." "It's not political," Frank assured her. "Just sharing your experience, what you saw, why you spoke up that day in court. It could help change how the system sees veterans like me." Ellen thought about it. He was right. There was nothing political about recognizing the humanity of people who appeared in her courtroom. And if her story could help other judges see beyond the charges to the person standing before them, wasn't that a good thing? "Let me check my calendar and speak with the chief judge," Ellen said. "I'd like to help if I can." Frank smiled, relief evident on his face. "Thank you, it would mean a lot to have you there." He hesitated, then added, "We've come a long way from that morning in your courtroom." "Yes," Ellen agreed softly. "A very long way." After Frank left, Ellen sat thinking about how much had changed. One small moment in court had rippled outward, touching not just Frank's life but dozens of others. And now the ripples might spread even further, to other communities, other courtrooms. She picked up her phone and called the chief judge to discuss the conference invitation. 2 weeks later, Ellen sat in the back row of the VFW hall watching the Brothers Found meeting. The hall was packed. Veterans of all ages filled the chairs, some in wheelchairs, some standing along the walls. The circle had grown so large that they now arranged the chairs in rows, with Frank and Joe at the front, leading the discussion. Today's topic was PTSD. A VA psychologist had come to speak, but the most powerful moments were when the veterans themselves shared their experiences. They spoke of nightmares, of being triggered by sudden noises, of feeling disconnected from family and friends who couldn't understand what they had been through. Ellen watched Frank as he listened to each speaker with deep attention. She saw how he nodded in recognition at certain descriptions, how he sometimes closed his eyes briefly when a story hit close to home. He had come so far from the lost man in her courtroom, yet he never forgot what it felt like to be that person. After the meeting, as people gathered around the coffee table, Ellen overheard a conversation between Frank and a young veteran who had come for the first time. The young man looked to be in his late 20s with close-cropped hair and tattoos on his forearms. He stood slightly apart from the others, his body tense, his eyes darting around the room as if looking for threats. Frank approached him carefully, not too close. "First time here?" he asked. The young man nodded stiffly. "My counselor at the VA suggested it. Don't know if it's for me." "That's okay," Frank said easily. "No pressure. I'm Frank Garland, Marines, Vietnam. Ben Kelly, Army, Afghanistan and Iraq." Frank nodded. "Different wars, same stuff follows you home." He was quiet for a moment, then said, "Took me 40 years to ask for help. Spent 3 of those years homeless after my wife died. Might have died on the street if not for a judge who saw me and a fellow vet who reached out." He nodded toward Joe, who was helping an older veteran fill out some forms. Ben looked at Frank with new interest. "You were homeless? Slept on park benches, in shelters when it got too cold. Didn't think I deserved better." Frank's voice was matter-of-fact, without self-pity. "I was wrong about that. So are you if you're thinking the same." Ben looked down. "It's hard, coming back, trying to fit in when everything feels wrong." "Yes, it is," Frank agreed. "But you don't have to do it alone. That's what we're here for. No one understands like another vet." Ben nodded slowly. "Maybe I'll come back next time." "We'll be here," Frank promised. "Every Tuesday and Thursday. And here's my number. if you need to talk before then." He handed Ben a simple business card with his name and phone number. Ellen watched this exchange with a full heart. Frank had found not just a home but a purpose. He was using his own pain to help others heal. It was a kind of redemption, a way of making meaning out of suffering. After the meeting, Ellen joined Frank and Joe as they cleaned up the hall. "That was powerful," she said, stacking empty coffee cups. "The way everyone shares so openly." "It's the only way to heal," Joe said. "Bringing the darkness into the light," Frank nodded. "When I first came home from Vietnam, no one wanted to hear about it. Put it behind you, they said. Move on. But you can't move on from something that's still inside you." "And now?" Ellen asked. Frank looked around the empty hall as if seeing the ghosts of all who had gathered there. "Now we tell our stories, and in the telling they lose some of their power over us." He smiled slightly. "It's a kind of freedom." As they walked to the parking lot, Frank asked, "Have you decided about Washington?" Ellen nodded. "I'll be there. The chief judge approved it. He thinks it's an important message for other judges to hear." "Thank you," Frank said simply. "For everything." Ellen shook her head. "I just asked a question that day in court. You and Joe did the real work." "Sometimes asking the right question is everything," Frank said, echoing what Joe had told her months ago. It opened a door. We just walked through it. Driving home, Ellen thought about doors opening, about questions asked and answered, about how justice sometimes wore unexpected faces, and how healing could begin with a simple human connection. In her 20 years on the bench, she had seen so much pain, so much broken humanity. But now she had also seen how that brokenness could be mended, how lives could be rebuilt, how purpose could grow from despair. One question, asked in a courtroom on an ordinary morning, had changed everything. 1 year had passed since that morning in courtroom number 4, when Judge Ellen Morris had made a simple appeal, and Joe Simmons had stood up to help Frank Garland. The summer heat had given way to fall, then winter, then spring, and now summer, again. Through the changing seasons, the Brothers Found program had continued to grow and thrive. Ellen sat in her office looking at an envelope that had just arrived in the mail. It bore the seal of the American Bar Association. Inside was a letter informing her that she had been nominated for the ABA's Community Service Award for her role in starting the Brothers Found program. The award ceremony would be held in Chicago next month. Ellen smiled, shaking her head slightly. She hadn't done this for recognition. In fact, she felt a bit uncomfortable being singled out when Frank and Joe had done the real work. She would have to call them about this. Her phone rang and Mary's voice came through the speaker. "Judge Morris, Frank Garland is here to see you. He says it's important." "Send him in, please," Ellen said, wondering at the coincidence. Frank entered, looking healthier and stronger than she had ever seen him. The lost look in his eyes was long gone, replaced by clarity and purpose. He carried a thick folder under his arm. "Ellen," he said with a warm smile. "Thank you for seeing me on such short notice." "Of course, Frank, I was just thinking about you. I received a letter from the American Bar Association. Apparently, I've been nominated for an award for helping start Brothers Found." Frank's smile widened. "That's why I'm here. Joe and I nominated you. We wanted to surprise you." Ellen shook her head. "That's very kind, but I don't deserve an award. I just asked a question in court that day. You and Joe built the program." "We couldn't have done it without you," Frank said. "Not just that first day, but all the support since then. Your speaking at the Washington conference helped get us national attention. 5 other cities have started similar programs based on our model." Ellen hadn't known that. 5 cities? That's wonderful, Frank. Frank nodded. San Diego, Phoenix, Denver, Atlanta, and Detroit. They all have judges involved inspired by what you did. He placed the folder on her desk. That's also why I'm here. We've put together a report on our first year. I thought you might like to see what your simple question has led to. Ellen opened the folder. Inside were photos, testimonials, and detailed statistics. The numbers were remarkable. 278 veterans helped with benefits, 143 placed in stable housing, 96 connected with medical care, 52 reunited with families, 37 helped with job training and placement. "Frank, this is incredible," Ellen said, looking up at him. "You've accomplished so much in just 1 year." "We're just getting started," Frank said. "The VA has offered us funding to expand our program. We're going to hire 2 full-time staff. Joe's going to be the director." "And you?" Ellen asked. Frank smiled. "I'll be the outreach coordinator, going to jails, shelters, wherever veterans might be falling through the cracks." His face grew more serious. "I know what it's like to be lost, to feel like no one sees. I want to be the one who sees them, who says, 'I understand and there's a way back.'" Ellen was deeply moved. The lost man who had stood before her bench a year ago was now leading others out of that same darkness. "There's something else," Frank said, pulling an envelope from his pocket. "An invitation. We're having a 1-year anniversary celebration for Brothers Found next Saturday at the community center. We've outgrown the VFW hall." He handed her the envelope. "We'd be honored if you would be our keynote speaker." Ellen took the invitation. "I'd be honored to speak, Frank. Thank you." "There's one more thing," Frank said, his voice growing softer. "Remember Ben Kelly, the young veteran from Afghanistan who came to the meeting that day you were there?" Ellen nodded. "The one with the tattoos who was standing apart from everyone else? That's him. He became a regular at our meetings, started helping other young vets. Last month he went back to school on the GI Bill. Psychology. Says he wants to work with veterans with PTSD." Frank's eyes were bright with pride. "He told me that coming to that first meeting saved his life. He'd been thinking about ending it all that day." Ellen felt a chill. "I had no idea. None of us did. That's why what we do matters so much. We never know who might be at the end of their rope, who might need just one person to reach out." Frank stood up. "Anyway, I should let you get back to work. I hope you can make it on Saturday." "I wouldn't miss it," Ellen assured him. After Frank left, Ellen sat quietly, thinking about the ripple effects of that day in her courtroom. One question, one response had led to hundreds of lives changed, perhaps even saved. It was humbling and inspiring all at once. Saturday evening arrived and Ellen drove to the community center. The parking lot was full, and a banner over the entrance read, "Brothers Found, 1-year anniversary." Inside, the large room was packed with people, veterans of all ages, their families, community members, and representatives from the VA and other organizations. Joe spotted her and came over immediately. "Judge Morris, thank you for coming. We've got quite a crowd." "It's wonderful, Joe. Congratulations on all you've accomplished." Joe shook his head. "None of this would have happened without you and Frank. He was lost and you saw him. I was just living my quiet life, minding my own business, until that day in court." Ellen smiled. "Sometimes we don't know what we're capable of until the moment calls for it." The program began with Joe welcoming everyone and giving a brief history of Brothers Found. Then various speakers shared stories of how the program had helped them or their loved ones. Ellen was struck by the raw honesty in their words, the courage it took to speak of their struggles and their healing. A woman in her 30s spoke of how the program had helped her father, a Vietnam veteran who had struggled with alcoholism for decades, to finally get sober and reconnect with his family. "I have my dad back," she said, tears in her eyes. "For the first time since I was a little girl, I have my dad back." A young man barely out of his teens spoke of returning from Afghanistan with invisible wounds. "I thought no one could understand what was in my head," he said. "But here I found people who had walked the same road, who didn't judge me, who showed me a way forward." When it was time for Ellen to speak, she felt a mix of emotions, humility, pride, gratitude. She walked to the podium and looked out at the sea of faces. So many lives touched, so many stories of struggle and resilience. "1 year ago," she began, "a man named Frank Garland stood before me in court on a minor trespassing charge. He was homeless, lost, disconnected from the benefits he had earned through his service to our country. I could have simply processed his case and moved on. That would have been the easy thing to do. She paused, looking at Frank, who sat in the front row beside Joe. But something made me look deeper, to see not just the charge but the person, to ask a simple question: is there anyone who can help? Ellen gestured to Joe. And Joe Simmons answered that question. One veteran reaching out to another. A simple act of human connection that has led to all of this. She swept her arm to indicate the room full of people. To hundreds of lives changed, to hope restored and dignity reclaimed. Looked back at the audience. In my courtroom, I deal with laws and procedures, evidence and precedents. But what I've learned from Frank and Joe and all of you is that true justice begins with seeing each other's humanity, with asking the right questions, with being willing to answer when called. As Ellen returned to her seat, the room erupted, in applause. Frank stood up, and then Joe. And then everyone was standing, clapping, some wiping tears from their eyes. After the program ended, people gathered in small groups, talking, laughing, sharing stories. Ellen watched Frank move through the crowd, stopping to speak with each person, listening intently, offering a word of encouragement or a pat on the shoulder. He had found his purpose, his way of healing his own wounds by helping others heal theirs. As Ellen prepared to leave, Frank approached her one last time. "Thank you for coming, Ellen, and for everything you've done." Ellen smiled. "Thank you, Frank, for showing me what's possible when we truly see each other, when we reach out instead of looking away." Frank nodded. One question, one answer. That's all it takes sometimes. Yes, Ellen agreed. Sometimes that's all it takes to change a life, or hundreds of lives. As she drove home, Ellen thought about how the simplest actions, seeing someone truly, asking a question, offering help, could set in motion changes that reached far beyond what anyone could imagine. In her courtroom tomorrow, and every day after, she would remember the power of those simple human moments, the moments that reminded us all that we weren't alone, that we belonged to each other, that we could find our way home if someone was willing to show us the path.